Pensacola. Next morning at the lodge for breakfast.
Good morning, Captain. Sleep well?
Yes, darn it, too well. It's getting to be a long spell since my last flying dream.
Have you tried rolling your head on your pillow at night?
Yes, but like I said, my neck is stiff and the pain is distracting. I may not be able to recall that talent.
You got through the pain of earaches as a child. Maybe your neck will limber up if you keep trying. Meanwhile, flying your Zimongo might be inspirational.
I've been thinking that too. I called a glider instructor I know, Sam Steele, to see if he might be willing to instruct you for your license. He flies an old Cub out of Salisbury on the eastern shore, 60 miles east, so it would be fairly simple for him to fly here. He is willing, but it wouldn't be quick or cheap, Mike. What do you think?
I'm game if you are willing. Since I'm not paying room rent now, it would be affordable, I think. What are the requirements?
It's not too bad for a glider license, which includes motor gliders. No medical certification or even a driver's license required, and you can solo at age 14. You need only 10 solo flights, which can be done in the landing pattern, before your flight exam. Of course, there's also a written and oral exam on federal aviation regulations. If you flew every day, you could finish up in a couple of weeks with my help. But there are always weather delays or aircraft and instructor availability, which could stretch it out for months.
That might take quite a chunk out of our time for the book, too, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily. On those days you fly, which would require only a couple of hours, we could carry on with the book after dinner. If we finish the book and you leave before getting your license, you would still be ahead if you got your license at the glider port east of Albuquerque.
Sounds good. I'd love to do it. Very generous of you to trust your humongo to me, Captain.
Not really. Consider it compensation for doing the book. Besides, like us, it's not good for the humongo to just sit idle, and I'll have an aerial chauffeur into the bargain. After breakfast at the end of the yellow brick sidewalk.
Where do you suppose they got these bright yellow bricks, Captain?
I don't know where the clay came from, but I'm told that the man who built this lodge in the 30s was a great fan of the Wizard of Oz film and had the resources to have bricks made any color he wished.
What a great film, wasn't it? Its appeal to young and old alike never goes out of date. Why do you suppose?
For me, it's the universally wonderful gospel messages delivered in a most charming way. Although the great Oz, like all wizards, turned out to be a fake, his simple lessons were the greatest gifts one could wish for. The only difference between the straw man and someone with a brain was simply the matter of a diploma. The only difference between the Tin Man and someone with a heart was a gold watch testimonial. The only difference between the Cowardly Lion and someone with courage was a medal. And finally, all Dorothy needed to find her way was to realize that there is no place like home. During Vietnam, I saw many lions scrambling for medals, doing dumb things or grossly exaggerating the truth to get them to prove their courage and ensure promotions. The thing was, Mike, we all knew that in many cases medals were awarded for phony events, so did nothing to prove courage or heroism. Same thing with degrees, gold watches, or ruby slippers. As the Dalai Lama said, we are all Buddhas within, but I digress. We left off with leaving UNM and Albuquerque behind, didn't we?
Correct. Recorder running, Captain. You and Bob towing your roadster to New Jersey.
Against Father's advice, I decided to face Aurélie for our farewell. We had been very close in Germany, and we had been engaged for 6 years, so I wanted closure. I was not prepared for what happened. Aurélie had been in the care of a psychologist. There was nothing very unusual in that, Everyone in Oralie's family saw psychologists at every bump in the road. I was very surprised, however, that Oralie was totally forgiving and declared she wanted to go to Pensacola with me.
Goodness, Captain, God let you off the hook, didn't he? How did that strike you?
Strike is the word. I was highly elated that Oralie was so willing to forgive and forget. On one hand, I was still committed, but on the other, I had written off chances of our future together. Plus, I really wasn't sure I needed the added complexity in my life at this point. Just the same, I was cautiously hopeful that things might work out somehow. We wouldn't arrive in Pensacola until late September, and your birth was due 6 weeks later. If Emma was true to her word, I could be free again as early as the end of the year. Oralie and I could pick up where we left off as planned after getting to know each other again. At that point, any positive possibility in my personal life looked good to me, Mike.
Sure, besides, you had more important priorities then, didn't you?
Flying, you mean? Hell yes, damn tootin' I did. Does it make me a bad guy because I held my priorities to be more important than your mother's or Oralie's?
Okay, shall we leave it and move on?
Listen, Mike, when you put yourself in the judge's seat with a rhetorical question like that, you're not getting by with, shall we leave it? If you wave a red flag in my face, stand by for a ram. We covered axe grinding at the beginning.
Good call, Captain. Quite right. I'll do better.
Okay, so I boarded the battleship Wisconsin, Norfolk to Edinburgh to Copenhagen, and return in 6 weeks. What a magnificent city Edinburgh is. What wonderful people. I loved every minute there, even though I was assigned to shore patrol duty. There was not a single incident. None of us could even buy a drink in the pubs without the Scots taking us in and picking up the check. There was a heat wave, 74 degrees, warmest it had been in 10 years, and people were sitting in the parks with their faces into the sun like sunflowers, soaking it in. Afternoons in the park, there were bagpipes with kilted dancers and crossed swords on the ground. We were pulled in to participate. While there, several sailors married women they met the year before. My impression of these wonderfully cheerful and feminine ladies was that a man could be happily married for life to any one of them. Of course, part of the picture was the reality of Scottish life. Because of family land ownership and economic conditions, men had to wait until their mid-30s for their inheritance before they could afford to be married. American sailors had an advantage.
Did you have a romantic adventure there?
Romantic adventure? Are you kidding? Wasn't I already in enough deep doo-doo?
You certainly were. Copenhagen next?
Yes, a wonderfully colorful city, but cold and unfriendly compared to Edinburgh. There were several shore patrol incidents. I was glad not to be involved.
How did you feel about your second exposure to the Black Shoe battleship Navy?
Pretty good compared to the destroyer crews. Our battleships were the all-time queens of the seas, beautiful lines and a hell of a lot of firepower. When we fired all 9 16-inch guns broadside, it moved the ship 12 feet sideways. Everything was first class compared to destroyers.
So you were commissioned immediately at the end of the cruise?
Not immediately. The captain went ashore as soon as we docked, and I had to sit on my butt for 3 days awaiting his return. September 2nd, 1955, the 10th anniversary of the Jap surrender, aboard Wisconsin's sister ship, USS Missouri. Ironically, on the next passage, the CO ran the Wisconsin aground, going up the river to the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard for decommissioning, thereby also decommissioning his career.
Did you heed your father's advice to tell Navy you were married before you were commissioned?
Yes, I did. During the cruise, I asked the chaplain what I should do. He said he would discuss it with the officer in charge of midshipmen and get back to me. When he did, I was told to sign the papers saying I was single. I picked up Orly and we reported for duty at Pensacola Naval Air Station, towing my roadster with the 1947 Ford Woody station wagon her parents sold me. The gate guard said I couldn't drive the roadster on base because it had no bumpers. I guess they had seen kids like me show up for flight training before.
Quite an entrance, Captain. Did you and Orly live together?
No, she took an apartment in town and a job at Monsanto Mills. I lived in the bachelor officers' quarters at Naval Air Station Pensacola during pre-flight training, and then NAS Whiting Field 25 miles away for basic flight training.
What was pre-flight training like?
Lots of aeronautical academics, plus physical fitness and survival training. The academics were interesting since it was directly related to flying. Physical fitness and survival training was grueling torture like the god-awful step test, jumping off a 20-foot tower into the pool, the obstacle course, plus devices like the Dilbert Dunker, which was a cockpit on 45-degree rails that dumped you into the pool and turned upside down, sinking as you struggled to get free from chute and harness.
What did you do with your hot rod?
Since I couldn't drive the roadster on base, I left it parked at the base hobby shop. Two fellow OIs, officers under instruction, who saw the roadster asked if I might be interested in stock car racing. I said I would loan the roadster's engine if they furnished the car. So Keith and George bought a '47 Ford Coupe, and we set about modifying it in the hobby shop garage for late model stock car racing on the local Five Flags half-mile dirt track. We worked on it every night until 10 p.m. closing time, so Orly and I had little time together, except that she got pregnant.
Whoa, hold up there, Captain. How did that happen?
In the usual way, of course. What can I say? Totally stupid of us. Naturally, Orly felt somewhat left out of the sex picture and wanted to be included. It certainly was not my intent, but felt I couldn't deny her, so I went along with it. I was easy. After waiting so long, I guess my guys had their wings and track shoes on. Pulling out was not adequate birth control.
This is getting better than the Officer and a Gentleman film.
Oh yes, Mike, and it keeps getting much better. For the sake of appearances, Orly and I got an apartment and told our friends that we were married. I went on to begin flying at Whiting Field and racing our coupe on weekends. Initially, we were to share the driving, but Keith was more interested in turning wrenches. Then George scared himself in an excursion off the track, so all the driving was left to me. What a blast, sliding around a half-mile dirt track in our navy blue and gold polka dot number 01 coupe. I won my second race, never placed lower than third, and never won more than $40. This was literally a redneck junkyard sport. Since Navy didn't permit us to race because of the risk, I did not use my name, so an announcer labeled me the Purple Mask, and it stuck. It was during this time that I met Dorothy. She drove up with George in his '38 Ford Roadster. When she stepped out, I damn near fainted. It was not just that she was absolutely the most gorgeous woman I ever saw, before or after. There was an inner light so familiar in her, I strongly felt that our destiny was entwined. Soon after, however, Dorothy too was pregnant. She and George were married, and we all became close friends.
So, considering the circumstances, it seems life wasn't going all so badly for you.
Not for long, though, Mike. Soon after you were born, one day just after a flight, a Marine with a sidearm walked up and asked, "Are you Ensign Souza, sir?" "Yes, why?" "Would you come with me, please? Captain Williams, the JAG officer at NAS Pensacola, wants to see you. He will explain." Emma had tried to call me at the BOQ, and my ex-roommate told her I had gotten married and moved out. She immediately wrote the Bureau of Naval Personnel, stating that we were married before I was commissioned, had a child, that I had not supported her financially, and that I had also married someone else. Captain Williams informed me that I was being charged with non-support, bigamy, and making a false statement. I had a 50% chance of losing my commission.
How did you respond?
I told Captain Williams the truth about what had happened. When we married, I told Emma I would send whatever allowance Navy paid me for being married, which amounted to $87 a month, rental allowance. An ensign's basic pay was $220 a month. Fortunately, I had receipts for the money orders I had sent Emma. The non-support charge was totally bogus. Initially, I didn't divulge my conversations with the chaplain aboard Wisconsin in the hope of keeping him and the officer in charge away from negative consequences.
How did Captain Williams react?
Great, but I'm going to digress before answering to tell you about this very special man. Captain Williams, I learned, had been a naval aviator in the Pacific during World War II and was shot down over a Jap-occupied island. He not only managed to evade capture, but over the next few months killed all 40 Jap soldiers on the island and was subsequently awarded the nation's highest medal, the Congressional Medal of Honor. After the war, Williams left the Navy, went back to college for a law degree, and then rejoined the Navy in the JAG Corps.
What's a JAG, Captain?
Judge Advocate General, the Navy's legal beagles. Which brings me back to your question. Williams was a prince in the finest sense of the word. After finally confiding that I had told the chaplain I was married, Williams located him and he confirmed my story. Then Williams came to our apartment to meet orally and advised her to go home until the matter was cleared up, which she did. Then he got in my Albuquerque attorney's face to accelerate the divorce. He got written positive endorsements from my flight instructors and drafted a letter for the Admiral's signature to recommend no further official action. Before signing it, however, the Admiral called me in. It didn't go very well, Mike. I really did not need another morality lecture from a stranger at that point. Not even my father had done that. Nevertheless, the Admiral signed the letter, but with paragraph 4 deleted, which would have been his personal endorsement of my great worth to the Navy as cannon fodder for another Korea.
That attitude, Captain?
I was innocent of all charges. If that didn't satisfy them, I was in the wrong Navy. Williams was mildly disappointed, and I'm sorry for that. He was a great benefactor and had surely walked the extra miles for me. But I had a line of self-respect that I wouldn't sacrifice. I sent Christmas cards to Williams every year until they were returned for unknown addressee. Anyhow, it took until June to get Emma to divorce court. She dragged her feet every step of the way, piling up bills. She had an expensive cesarean delivery solely because, as she told me later, she did not want to have a birth pass through her genitals. She said she couldn't work because she was breastfeeding. Her attorney got fed up, fired her, and refused to represent her in the divorce. And so it went. Finally, I drove nonstop from Pensacola to Albuquerque for divorce court. It was June. Orly was 7 months pregnant. The judgment was $100 a month child support, more than a third of my pay. For the sake of legitimacy, my ass, and this wasn't the end of her efforts to screw me by a long shot. On the way back to Pensacola, I met Orly in Pascagoula, Mississippi, where there was no waiting period. We were married by a pastor in a small church the day after the divorce was final. To get past the embarrassment of being very pregnant, I told the minister that we had been married before I was commissioned, and I needed another official date of marriage. Had I known the future complications, I wouldn't have made up that excuse.
Quite a colorful picture, Captain. 2 kids and 2 wives in a year, arrested for bigamy, driving stock cars, and going through flight training. You had all the makings for a fine puking dog, didn't you?
Yep, not even JB could hold a candle to me, and it does get better. Not that I was trying to be colorful. I just followed the yellow brick road.
How did Orly hold up through all this?
Magnificently well. She couldn't have been more positive and optimistic. There was never a harsh word between us or hint of recrimination from her about Emma. Nevertheless, there was an underlying toll on our relationship. Too much happened too fast for us to renew the bond. We simply made the most of the chaos and quietly hoped for better in our future.
Didn't the pressures and distractions affect your flying?
No, but I was disappointed initially. I wasn't much better as a flight student than I had been in academia. No doubt about it, I was always a slow learner in everything except auto racing. I could understand why Navy flight training was all about procedures and precision, which required rote memorization. But it took some of the romance out of flying in the early phase. Dirt track auto racing was easy for me and more exciting. However, as I progressed in flying and personal matters settled down a bit, it got to be fun. We started out flying SNJs, the Navy version of the famous AT-6 Texan. The SNJ was used as an advanced trainer in World War II and became the most demanding primary trainer Navy has had. Its performance was nearly equivalent to some of our frontline fighters in the early 40s. There are many still flying. We flew in 4 plane divisions with an instructor chasing through formation, aerobatics, air-to-air gunnery, dive bombing, and carrier qualification phases. It turned out to be more fun than any other airplane I flew in the Navy, especially tail chase aerobatics and carrier landings. There was one infamous instructor in the formation phase known as the Screamer, because he was inclined to lose his cool with his students. The Screamer was immortalized one day when 4 instructors replaced the Screamer's students and did everything wrong, much to the rage of the Screamer, whose tirades and rants were preserved for posterity on an audio tape, which occasionally still makes the rounds on the internet. As you will see, I enjoyed the opportunity to fly with the Screamer 5 years later. The gunnery, dive bombing, and carrier qualification phases were flown at Barron Field, Foley, Alabama, called Bloody Barron because of the high accident rate. Dive bombing was done on offshore targets. Because it is difficult to judge altitude over water, plus the lure of target fixation, it was essential to keep track of the rapidly unwinding altimeter in 45-degree dives. One of my classmates failed to pull out. Water depth was only 35 feet, so he and the SNJ were recovered. Out of respect for my classmate and curiosity to see what a 250-knot impact with the water did to an airplane, I went to see the wreckage on a flatbed truck. There were no signs of body parts, of course, but the heavy seat belts and shoulder harness were broken, and there was a clear imprint of the body's impact with the instrument panel. As I stood looking at the wreckage, a short, thin, elderly-looking commander walked up and asked about the crash. We stood silently for a few moments before he said, "Sometimes when I think about all the friends I have lost in plane crashes," and he choked up in tears. I wondered if I would one day have that same experience.
Did you?
No, I was lucky to lose no close friends to crashes or combat. The loss rate was much lower in my day than in the commander's. On a lighter note, I should relate two night landing pattern stories about the Jap and Italian students in training with us. The pattern for our first night landings in SNJs was 4 airplanes in the lower pattern doing touch and goes. 4 more planes with a designated leader circled higher above the field until the lower pattern made final landings. A runway duty officer, RDO, instructor, was posted on the approach end of the runway to observe and control the lower pattern. Another instructor flew around the upper circle. To signal a final landing to others in the lower pattern, the RDO told students when to turn on their landing lights. One Jap student did not understand. "Turn on your landing lights," the instructor said. Pause. "Say again, RDO?" "Turn on your landing lights." Pause. Say again, RDO?" "Turn on your landing lights." Pause. "Ah, so, landing rights." Later, the upper pattern instructor said, "Leader of the upper pattern, you are too close to the field. Take it out." No response. Minutes pass and the instructor says, "Leader of the upper pattern, you are too far out now. Take it in." No response. Soon the agitated instructor says, "Leader of the upper pattern, I told you to take it in. Acknowledge." In a heavy Italian accent, the student said, "First you tellin' me take it out, then you tellin' me take it in. Why don't you make up your mind?" After the flight, in the hangar, I saw the instructor giving the Italian holy hell, but the Italian couldn't have cared less, standing there holding his helmet with "Que sera, sera" stenciled across the back of it.
Did the foreign students go through the entire flight training program?
No, they didn't carrier qualify. In fact, our little joke was that the Japs only had to be taught how to take off.
What was carrier qualification like?
Well, 3 more classmates had accidents which totaled their SNJs. Fortunately, they were uninjured. One had an engine failure on takeoff and came down in a wooded area. Trees sheared off both wings, turned him sideways, and 2 more trees took off the nose and tail. The only sizable part of the SNJ remaining was the cockpit, with him sitting in it unscratched. Another classmate stalled and spun into the ground on a field practice carrier landing approach. As the pilot jumped out of the wreckage and ran full speed past the instructor landing signal officer, with his helmet on and parachute bouncing off the back of his legs, the instructor said, "Broke your airplane, didn't you?" The third accident was aboard the carrier USS Saipan, the same carrier that was in our Brazil cruise. Saipan was a small World War II escort carrier with no angled deck landing area, which meant that if you didn't hook a wire, there was no going around for another try. You were going into the barricade or worse. I was a walk aboard, which meant I was to hot seat another classmate's SNJ after he made his qualifying arrested landings. Meanwhile, I was permitted to observe the proceedings from the starboard catwalk abeam the landing area. One of the chiefs said I was lucky to get to see my classmates do it before trying it myself. I assumed he meant good luck, but on his first approach, another classmate leveled off high, flew into the barricade, and crashed into the island structure, uninjured. I was impressed by how fast the wreckage was cleared away. Obviously, the crew had done this many times before. Finally, it was my turn. I was chewing gum so fast and hard after my first landing that the taxi director had a big laugh. "What great fun, Mike. How glad I was to be Navy. The Air Force sure had nothing to match the thrill of this."
Better than auto racing, Captain?
Oh, hell yes. The thing about racing on a half-mile dirt track was that the thrill was sustained throughout the race. Although just the final phase of a flight, carrier landings top anything else you can do with an airplane. A quality 30-second crescendo of mounting unmatched excitement.
You make it sound like sex.
Even better, Mike. Good analogy, though. But speak for yourself on the 30 seconds timing.
What next, Captain?
The final phase of basic flight training was instrument training in T-28s, a much higher performance airplane than the SNJ, but less fun. Flying blind on instruments under a hood is a difficult grind. Very precise flying, demanding constant concentration on flight instruments to fight off false sensory signals, which would otherwise result in complete spatial disorientation, vertigo. The bookwork was tough too, with many flight rules to memorize. But it all seemed to pass quickly.
So much for basic. On to advanced training?
Yes, a very important step. Where you went next determined your entire flying career. There were separate programs for seaplanes, patrol planes, propeller-driven carrier planes, and jets. Initially, I wanted to be an airline pilot, but whatever residual ambition I had along that line was washed away in basic training. Now, I wanted to fly carrier-based jet fighters, period. Problem was, so did everyone else, and there weren't many Navy jet fighter squadrons in the 50s. Then some enterprising personnel genius came up with the idea of taking advantage of the supply-demand situation by offering advanced training of choice for extending obligated service 1 year. At first I decided to take my chances, but then it was obvious that so many were extending for jets, there was no chance of getting them otherwise. I was almost too late. I literally ran all the way to the admin office and was so out of breath I was barely able to make my preference known. But jets it was to be. Just one more hurdle, the checkout flight physical. I flunked it, disqualifying astigmatism in both eyes.
How could that be? You passed the Denver eye exam just the year before. Your eyes couldn't have gone bad that fast.
That's what I thought. Obviously, Denver didn't catch it. Providence had interceded.
Do you think Providence had something to do with the choices made in your imaginary conversation with God?
I was willing to trade orally for flying and passed the tests. So now I had orally back and flunked. What would be your answer?
No doubt about it, Captain. How did you get around it?
It was my great good fortune that the eye doctor was another Captain Prince, like Williams. The doctor said that the Navy's standards on eyesight were based on getting 20 years of flying out of me. If I wore sunglasses, stayed out of the sun, and could read anything on the 20/20 line on the eye chart the next morning, he would recommend a waiver. So I did, and he did, and I was on my way to Corpus Christi for jet advanced training.
You must have felt that God was putting you through the mill. How did you feel about that?
I did feel a strong hand in my life. I didn't know about Gene's influence then, but I was very grateful that matters kept turning out well. Reminds me of the story about God's sense of humor. One day he and St. Peter were watching a Catholic Mass, and God said, "Watch this." He said, "Sit down," and everyone sat. "Stand up," and they did. "Kneel," and they did. "Sit, kneel, cross yourselves, stand, kneel, sit," and so on. God and St. Peter had a jolly fine time.
What about your racing pals, George and Keith?
Glad you asked. The divorce and settlement were a financial blow, and Aurelie was no longer working, so I had to put the engine back into my Roadster and sell it. The wagon's wood was rotted out, so that had to go too. I replaced it with a '53 Studebaker. My hot rod days were over. For the second racing season, Keith and George bought a '32 Coupe and moved up to modified stock car racing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at Pensacola, Fort Walton Beach, and Montgomery. I did the driving but little mechanical work, though I attended the hobby shop every night until closing time. There was so little time for Aurelie that I totally missed her birthday. It was time to quit, and I did.
Did you lose touch with George and Keith when you moved to Corpus Christi?
Keith went to patrol plane training in Kansas, so I lost touch with him for a long time. George went to single-engine propeller attack training nearby. He and Dorothy lived near us, and we became even closer friends than we had been in Pensacola.
Aurelie must have been close to delivery?
Very close, Mike. My last Pensacola T-28 flight was August 11th, '56. David Alexander Sousa was born August 28th in Corpus Christi.
How did it go?
No complications. The wives had been briefed about the importance of letting their jet pilots get full nights of rest and not keep them up with rocking the baby, diaper changing, and bottle feeding. Aurelie took it to heart, bless her, and was very stoic. The afternoon when it was time, she simply went to the base hospital and gave birth. By the time I was informed, it was all over.
What were your feelings about fatherhood then?
Honestly, I must say that David was the most perfectly beautiful baby I ever saw, before or since. Otherwise, I have to admit that I felt detached. It had simply happened, with little will or contribution from me.
Same about me?
Yes, in a normal family relationship, perhaps I would have felt more involved. Who knows? As it happened, 2 months later, Aurelie was pregnant again. Christopher Lee Sousa was to be born July 13th, '57 in San Diego. So I had 2 wives and 3 children in 20 months. There was so much on our plates that there was little opportunity to contemplate the emotional significance of marriage or fatherhood.
My, Captain, your forebodings about sex were certainly well-founded, weren't they? Did you ever wish you had taken your father's advice to never see Aurelie again?
At the time, it wouldn't have been productive for me to dwell on that question, Mike. We just accepted events as being the nature of life and made the best of it. As it turned out 14 years later, though, as you will see, Father was correct. In Germany, I disagreed with Aurelie's declared intention to have 4 children. Obviously, however, we were well on our way to that. You no doubt wonder why birth control wasn't employed. But these were the '50s, remember, many years before the pill, diaphragms, foams, or vasectomies. Condoms and the rhythm method were about the only choices, other than the good old Catholic solution, the absurd rhythm method. Then, when the diaphragm came along, Aurelie said she couldn't use it because of her tipped uterus. I had a block against condoms, so I certainly do not hold myself blameless, Mike. In any event, ladies who want to have babies are an undeniable force, and having 5 wonderful children turned out to be a great blessing and a joy. There have been a number of times in my life where events occurred counter to my wishes, but turned out to be better choices than I would have made for myself. As my good friend Ron Hess observed, men are led through life by their penis.
Sad but true, isn't it? But you were surely well compensated. You were a jet pilot in the heyday of jets.
Absolutely, jet pilots were everyone's heroes then, and we were pioneers on the cutting edge of aviation. Only 50 years since the Wright brothers' flight. Navy was still flying our first generation of carrier jets, and space programs were Buck Rogers' dreams. Risky business, too. After flying my first jet, the TV-2, under the hood for instrument training, I went to the final squadron before getting my wings to fly Korean War vintage F-9, F-5 Panther fighters. For our welcome aboard, the squadron CO, Tiger Lewis, assembled us in the ready room. He sat on the edge of the desk and glowered at us individually for a very long time, like Jack Balance in his worst crazy gunfighter role. Finally, he said that within 3 years, 1 in 5 of us would have been killed in a plane crash. After letting that sink in, he lectured us that we had to want to fly more than anything else in life. If you wouldn't rather fly than eat, I'm going to find out who you are and boot your butt out of this program. Someone had complained about being scheduled to fly during lunchtime. As much as we all love flying more than life, I think we each felt a touch of unworthiness. I did decide, however, that I better show some responsibility as a family man and get some life insurance. The John Hancock agent who came to our home was a very charming lady who kept buttering me up with, "Oh, you jet pilot, you," and sold us a $10,000 ordinary life policy for a whopping $40 monthly premium, nearly half of my flight pay. Our black shoe peers, always jealous of flight pay, liked to ask, "I know what you do to earn your flight pay, but what do you do to earn your base pay?" Our answer was, "Look, we don't get paid more than you. We just make it quicker."
What was flying Panthers like?
Outstanding, wonderful. Everything before this had been two-seat trainers. Panthers were the real thing. Single-engine, single-seat, front-line carrier jet fighters flown in Korean combat just a couple of years before. Perhaps you saw them in the movie The Bridges of Turi. We flew in 4 plane flights plus an instructor. Our instructor was very cool and near our age. He looked and acted like Elvis Presley. Since he was a duck hunter, he named us Pintail Flight. Instead of checking in on the radio after startup or frequency changes by saying 1 up, 2 up, etc., we quacked, once for number 1 in the flight, and so on down the line. Our first flight was to go off on our own to individually explore the Panther's envelope. Before the flight, another member of the flight and I had a discussion about what would happen if we pointed the nose straight up and rolled the airplane until it ran out of airspeed. Finally, we asked the instructor. His logical answer was that it would be very difficult to judge pointing straight up, so the nose would just fall off toward the closest horizon. We decided to test that answer, and both had the same experience. We may not have had our noses pointed exactly straight up, but the gyroscopic action of rolling kept us on track until the yaw string in front of the windscreen, used as a yaw trim indicator for air-to-air gunnery, shot straight out in front of our Panthers as we fell back down the way we came. Not for long, of course. The Panthers were smarter than we were in righting themselves nose down. Except for carrier landings, we did pretty much everything we had done in SNJ's formation, aerobatics, and gunnery. I have a vivid memory of my first Panther takeoff. First flights in a new type airplane were always similar for me, a feeling that I had no idea what I was doing. Since jets did not have ground-level ejection seats then, we took off and landed Panthers with the sliding canopy open to facilitate exiting the cockpit in the event of a crash. We were briefed to land straight ahead if the engine quit on takeoff. Since there was family housing off the departure end of the normally used runway, someone asked if we shouldn't try to avoid them. The answer was no. Land straight ahead. There might not be anyone home. So I was thinking about that during my first Panther takeoff when I closed the canopy and it got so deadly quiet I was certain that the engine had failed. But it hadn't, thank goodness. No one had mentioned that the Panther's pressurization system was the quietest ever made. I have never flown another airplane with near the silence in the cockpit, not even gliders. I have several more flying tales in that phase to report. David had colic, which kept us awake most of the night. One morning I slept through the alarm and was 15 minutes late for a 6 a.m. briefing. To my horror, Tiger Lewis was replacing our instructor. Thankfully, I was spared with a brief comment on the importance of punctuality, but Tiger put me on his wing for some close formation work. Although his helmet and oxygen mask covered all but his gunfighter eyes, that was enough to cause a slight ripple through my controls when he looked at me. During another flight with our regular instructor, I saw 8 airplanes where I knew there were only 4, a sure sign of anoxia, confirmed by the fact that my oxygen regulator was not blinking, and made further apparent when I tried to report it to the instructor with slurred speech. We immediately descended and returned to base. Troubleshooting revealed that the cockpit pressurization dump valve was open, so I'd had a double whammy coincidental failure, which might have been fatal. On the next flight, I found that the oxygen blinker on that airplane wasn't working either, so I had my mask checked. We carried our kneeboard checklists and oxygen mask in our helmets. It was discovered that a piece of checklist plastic binding had broken off and lodged in my oxygen mask exhalation flapper valve, holding it open, with the result that I had been inhaling cockpit air instead of oxygen. One weekend, we had a mass cross-country flight of 20 Panthers to Dallas. The rumor was that Dallas girls were very attracted to naval aviators, especially in dress blue uniforms. Navy wings of gold were crassly called leg spreaders. Our pintail flight wasn't scheduled to stay overnight, so we did not take along baggage. As fate would have it, however, the weather closed in and we were stuck for the night. So we joined our classmates for a Saturday night at the Dallas Hilton in our sweaty flight suits. I will never forget the scene in the lobby. One enterprising young aviator had purchased a toy helicopter at the gift shop, which flew at the end of a hand-crank cable to the rotor, with a sign underneath reading, "Party in room 812, free booze, everyone welcome," just as a black tie and furs reception party arrived. And it worked. Some of them showed up. Mike, I just can't express how proud I was to be in the company of such outstanding naval aviators.
Wow, Captain, I'm beginning to understand. You were in the right place, weren't you?
Oh yes, I was a most fortunate man. December 19th, 1956, the day I got my Navy wings of gold, was the proudest and happiest event of my life, and the second of only 2 times I got so drunk I lost memory of the celebration. It was a long and hard road to hoe, but it happened, and nothing could ever take it away from me. I was a naval aviator. Thank God.
What about Dorothy and George?
Dorothy had cooked us a wonderful Christmas dinner and then excused herself to give birth to their daughter Anne. Inexplicably, George quit flight training, got orders to the Philippines, and left Dorothy and Anne behind. Dorothy returned to Pensacola, and they eventually divorced. Having grown up with 9 siblings on a Texas ranch, Dorothy was even more stoic than Aurelie. As a wise man once advised, a man should always marry a girl from Texas, because no matter what happens, she's seen worse. This was far from the end of Dorothy in my life, though, and I did see George again.